Oh, rather a lot of menus, yes. Also, I evidently saved this file with a whole bunch of model panels open, so let's just close all this stuff. And let's disable the face machine for a moment. I'll explain what that means momentarily. Okay, so this character's rig was built with actually a plugin that we made called the Setup Machine, and it was built to do a whole bunch of stuff. Honestly, in a lot of ways, it's not too terribly different from the way that most character rigs are built. It does have a couple of interesting things, and one of the things that I was going to show you today was how to build one particular feature of this rig, which is the kind of stretchy spine that we have here. This is running, incidentally, incredibly slowly. I bet that I have all of this stuff being subdivided, and I bet that I shouldn't have it all subdivided. I bet that's what's going on here. What I am doing right now is turning subdivision surfaces on and off. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of a subdivision surface. In Max, they might be called turbo smooth. Basically, you know, it takes a subdivision surface takes a polygonal surface and subdivides it so that it's smooth in concept. And in Maya, you can flip back and forth between something that's subdivided and not, using the 1, 2, or 3 keys, rather than putting a specific what in Max you call a modifier, and in Maya you call a node. But you have this sort of situation in which you can move the hips and torso around completely independently of each other. So there's something funny there, actually. That did not used to happen. There may be something slightly broken inside the rig since I last looked at it. But just ignore that for the moment. That didn't happen.
Ignoring.
That would not happen, and I, could eventually go in and figure out why that was happening, but, But what's actually going on here is I have a whole bunch of controls, and these are actually just NURBS curves, and they're there just for display purposes. They have no, they don't get rendered or anything. They're not an important part of the character, but what they are is the actual bone structure that I have going under here in this character. And this may be a concept you're familiar with. I don't really know how much rigging you guys have done. There's really two sides to building a rig. There's the deformation. And the deformation typically happens because you are drawing some sort of bones. Max has its own bone system. It's a little bit different from Maya, but the basic concepts are basically the same. Inside the mesh, and using some sort of weighting, point weighting usually, to define what areas of the mesh are being controlled by a given bone versus some other bone. And you can usually paint basically between what points are being affected by what particular set of bones. Paint between the influences of different bones, basically. Yes.
You mentioned NURBS curves before.
Yes.
Folks, that's splines.
Yes, it's splines. That's right. I don't know if you guys have NURBS curves in Max or whether that's what you call them.
We do. Some good Max.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're just splines.
Splines are great.
Or they're a specific kind of spline anyway that Maya uses a lot. But basically there's a whole other side to rigging, which is actually the part that tends to be more difficult, and that's creating essentially the interface for the animator. Building the controls that will be used to articulate the character. And in this case, let's see, I can turn on joints so you can actually see what the joint structure is. And you should see them in there. Yeah, okay, let me hide the polygons, otherwise it's a little hard to see. But there is a whole joint structure in here, and this at least probably fairly self-evident what all of these are. I mean, they're just bones. And the deformation on the character is being based off of them in a variety of ways. But these controls don't have a direct effect. I mean, these controls are not direct influences of the mesh. There is a whole structure of nodes between the controls and the bones. It's being used to control precisely what the bones do when a specific control is moved around. And that's a great deal of what people do when they talk about rigging. I may be repeating something you guys already know, but I'm sort of trying to get a little bit of a groundwork here. But a lot of the work involved is basically figuring out what is the interface the animator wants, what specific sort of points of articulation are you going to need to move the character around. And in the case of a lot of characters, this character is not very cartoony. You're not going to be. We were not deforming the character